humanity had always been seen as weak in the eyes of the galaxy. For centuries, alien species dominated the stars, their technology far superior, their fleets vast and powerful. Earth was little more than a speck of dust in the vastness of space, a planet that had yet to make its mark in the grand tapestry of galactic civilization. But this perception was about to change forever, in a way no one had ever anticipated. It all began with a discovery one that would send shockwaves through the universe. In the cold, distant reaches of space, deep within the uncharted sectors, a human exploration team uncovered something extraordinary. The team, led by Captain Alexandra Stark, was sent on a routine mission to investigate a recently discovered anomaly, a signal that was unlike anything humanity had ever encountered. They had no idea that what they were about to uncover would change the course of history. On a barren, forgotten planet, buried beneath layers of ancient rock, they found the ruins of an ancient alien civilization far older than anything the galaxy had ever known. The wreckage of warships, massive and powerful, lay scattered across the surface. Alien technology unlike anything in human hands was found in abundance, energy cores capable of powering entire fleets, weapons that could rip through enemy ships like paper, and even star maps that hinted at a time when this long-forgotten race had ruled the stars. The humans had stumbled upon the remnants of a once great empire, and in those ruins, they found the key to their future. Word of the discovery spread quickly through the ranks of humanity's highest leaders. At first, it was met with skepticism, but as the evidence grew undeniable, the Terran Federation took swift action. The ancient alien technology was reverse-engineered, its secrets slowly unraveled by the brightest minds in human science. It wasn't long before the first Terran warship, built with this advanced technology, was launched into space. It was a modest beginning, small, experimental, but it was a beginning nonetheless. Humanity was no longer the weak, insignificant species they had once been. The Terran fleet grew rapidly, its numbers swelling as more warships were constructed. But there was no time to waste. The galaxy was filled with powerful and dangerous species, and many of them were not kind to those they viewed as inferior. The Vraks, a fearsome insectoid race known for their brutal conquests, had been eyeing human space for some time, seeing it as a valuable target for expansion. The Federation knew that it wouldn't be long before the Vraks launched their assault, and so the Terran fleet had to be prepared. Admiral Catherine Cat Rhodes was appointed to lead the Terran fleet. A strategic genius with years of military experience, Rhodes was the perfect person to lead humanity's first real defense. She knew that humanity could not afford to fight like the other galactic powers. They didn't have the resources or the numbers to engage in traditional battles, so they would have to fight smarter, not harder. It was a risky strategy, but it was humanity's only chance. Rhodes's first command was the defense of the Galcoran Nebula, a region of space known for its dense clouds of gas and dust. It was a perfect location for ambushes, and Rhodes knew that it would be the perfect battlefield to test humanity's new fleet. The Vraks, confident in their strength and superiority, were already en route to invade. They had no idea what they were about to face. As the Vraks fleet approached the nebula, the Terrans laid in wait. Using their newfound cloaking technology, they hid their ships within the clouds, rendering them invisible to the enemy's sensors. The first moments of the battle were almost eerily quiet as both fleets waited. But the silence didn't last long. Admiral Rhodes issued the order to strike, and the Terran fleet launched a surprise attack, emerging from the nebula like a swarm of hornets. The Vraks fleet, caught completely off guard, struggled to react in time. The battle that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. The Vraks, used to dominating their enemies through sheer force, found themselves unable to counter the Terran tactics. The humans fought with precision and coordination, using their advanced technology to outmaneuver the Vraks at every turn. The Terran ships, smaller and less numerous, were able to pick apart the larger Vraks warships with surgical strikes, disabling their weapons and propulsion systems before moving on to the next target. It wasn't a battle of brute force, it was a battle of wits, and the Terrans were winning. For days, the fight raged across the nebula, each side losing ships, but neither willing to give up. The Vraks, in their desperation, began to resort to more extreme tactics, launching kamikaze-style attacks in an attempt to overwhelm the human fleet. But no matter what they threw at the Terrans, Admiral Rhodes was always one step ahead. She predicted every move, countering each attack with ruthless efficiency. The tide of the battle turned when the Vrax flagship, a massive warship capable of destroying entire planets, entered the fray. It was a terrifying sight, its weapons glowing with lethal intent. The flagship's presence turned the battle into a near-lose situation for the Terrans. But Rhodes, ever the strategist, saw an opportunity. She ordered her fleet to engage the flagship directly, knowing that this would be their best chance to cripple the Vrax command structure. In a daring move, a small group of human ships, including Rhodes's own flagship, launched a coordinated assault on the Vrax vessel. The final moments of the battle were nothing short of chaos. The Terran fleet, though battered and bloodied, launched everything they had at the Vrax flagship, pouring fire into its vulnerable spots. Explosions rocked the massive ship as its shields failed and its weapons went offline. With one final strike, the flagship was destroyed, and with it, the will of the Vrax to continue the fight. The battle was over, and the Terran fleet had won against all odds. The victory at Galcoran Nebula sent shockwaves across the galaxy. The Vrax, once feared for their dominance, had been decisively defeated by a small human fleet. News of the victory spread quickly, and soon other galactic powers began to take notice. The galaxy had learned an important lesson that day. Humanity was not a species to be underestimated. With their new fleet and advanced technology, the Terrans were no longer the weak, helpless creatures they had once been. The galaxy would have to reckon with them. As Admiral Rhodes stood on the bridge of her flagship, looking out at the stars, she knew that this victory was just the beginning. There were many more challenges ahead, but humanity had proven something that day when faced with impossible odds. They didn't just survive. They thrived. The rise of the Terran fleet had begun, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The Galcoran Nebula was a place of beauty and danger, a swirling mass of cosmic dust and gas that stretched for light years. Its dense clouds were perfect for hiding ships, a natural trap for any fleet that dared to venture into its depths. The Vrax knew this, and they had chosen it as the battlefield for their invasion of human space. The Terran fleet, though smaller and less experienced, had an advantage that the Vrax never expected. They had the element of surprise, and their commander, Admiral Catherine Rhodes, was a master tactician who had spent her entire career preparing for this moment. As the Vrax fleet neared the nebula, the Terran fleet was already in position, hidden within the thick clouds of gas that surrounded the region. The human ships, equipped with cloaking technology scavenged from the ruins of the ancient alien civilization they had discovered, were completely invisible to the enemy. The Vrax, confident in their superior numbers and strength, didn't even consider the possibility of an ambush. They believed they would crush the Terran fleet with ease. But as they entered the nebula, their sensors went haywire. The thick clouds of dust and gas scrambled their readings, and they couldn't detect a single human ship. The Terrans were ghosts, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Admiral Rhodes stood on the bridge of her flagship, watching the Vrax fleet as it moved deeper into the nebula. The silence in the control room was almost unbearable. Her crew, though trained for this moment, felt the weight of the unknown pressing down on them. Rhodes knew that the first moments of the battle would be crucial. If the Vrax detected them too soon, the element of surprise would be lost. She clenched her fists, her mind racing through the plans she'd crafted over the past months. Every move, every countermeasure, every risk had been calculated. The Terrans had only one chance to win, and she would not let it slip away. The Vrax fleet, unaware of the danger that lurked just beyond their reach, continued to move forward, their massive ships slowly crawling through the nebula. The tension in the Terran fleet was palpable. Each ship was cloaked, moving silently, waiting for the signal to strike. Time seemed to stretch out, each second a moment closer to the inevitable clash. Rhodes kept her eyes fixed on the view screens, her mind focused entirely on the task at hand. The Terran fleet was ready, but the Vrax had no idea what was coming. Then, as if on cue, the first Terran ship emerged from the nebula, firing a single precise shot that disabled one of the Vrax warships. The Vrax had barely any time to react before a second Terran ship appeared, launching a barrage of missiles that struck another Vrax ship dead in its engines. The Vrax were stunned. They had never encountered anything like this before. Their fleets, which had swept through countless star systems, had always relied on overwhelming firepower to crush their enemies. But now, they were being torn apart by a force they didn't even see coming. Chaos erupted in the Vrax fleet. The Terran ships, though outnumbered, were using the nebula's cover to their advantage, striking from unexpected angles and disappearing just as quickly. The Vrax tried to retaliate, firing blindly into the gas clouds, but their shots were inaccurate, and they were losing precious time. Every second they spent searching for the humans was a second the Terran fleet used to deal another crushing blow. Admiral Rhodes, watching from the bridge, felt a rush of adrenaline as the first signs of victory began to show. The Vrax were in disarray, and the Terrans were in control. But the Vrax were not defeated yet. As the battle wore on, the Vrax commander, a ruthless and experienced warrior named General Thrak, adapted quickly to the human tactics. Thrak realized that the Terrans were relying on surprise and hit-and-run tactics, so he ordered his fleet to scatter. Instead of attacking in a single formation, the Vrax ships split into smaller groups, each one trying to corner a Terran ship and destroy it. They used their numbers to their advantage, surrounding the Terran vessels and forcing them to fight in close quarters. The Terran fleet, though skilled, was now at a disadvantage. The Vrax ships were larger and more powerful, their weapons capable of turning human ships into scrap in a single shot. Admiral Rhodes knew that she had to act quickly or risk being overwhelmed. She ordered her fleet to fall back deeper into the nebula, using the thick gas clouds to shield them from the Vrax weapons. The plan was risky, but it was the only option. If the Terrans could regroup, they might have one last chance to turn the tide of the battle. As the Terran ships retreated, the Vrax followed, eager to finish the fight. But as they entered the heart of the nebula, something unexpected happened. The clouds of gas grew even denser, and the Vrax ships, which had relied on their superior sensors to track the Terrans, began to lose their way. Their once mighty fleet was now scattered, their formations broken, and the humans were still nowhere to be found. Admiral Rhodes saw her chance. She ordered the Terran fleet to strike one last time. This was the moment that would decide the battle. The Terran ships emerged from the shadows of the nebula, their weapons blazing as they tore through the Vrax ranks. The Vrax, disoriented and unable to see where the Terrans were coming from, were helpless to stop the onslaught. Ship after ship was disabled, its weapons reduced to nothing more than smoldering wreckage. The human fleet, small and outnumbered, was showing the galaxy what they were capable of. The Vrax were no longer the ones in control. The battle raged on for hours, but slowly, the Terrans began to push the Vrax back. General Thrak, realizing that defeat was inevitable, ordered a full retreat. But it was too late. The Terran fleet had already crippled the Vrax command structure, and without their leadership, the remaining Vrax ships surrendered or were destroyed. By the time the last of the Vrax fleet limped away, the nebula was filled with the wreckage of their once proud warships. The Battle of the Galkoran Nebula was over, and the Terran fleet had won. The Vrax, once seen as unstoppable, had been humbled by a force they never expected. News of the victory spread throughout the galaxy, and, for the first time, humanity's name was spoken with respect and fear. The Terrans had proven that they could fight not only with strength, but with intelligence and cunning, and the galaxy would never look at them the same way again. As Admiral Rhodes stood on the bridge of her flagship, watching the nebula fade into the distance, she couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. The Terran fleet had faced the impossible and emerged victorious. But this battle was just the beginning. The galaxy had learned to fear humanity, and Rhodes knew that more challenges awaited. The Terrans had shown the galaxy what they were capable of, but now they had to prove that this victory was just the first step in a much larger war. The echoes of the Terran fleet's victory at the Galkoran Nebula rippled through the galaxy faster than anyone could have imagined. What had started as a desperate, nearly impossible fight for survival had quickly turned into a monumental turning point for the entire galaxy. The Vrax, once the feared conquerors of vast star systems, had been humiliated by a fleet far smaller, less experienced, and thought to be technologically inferior. For the first time in galactic history, the rest of the universe was forced to recognize the Terrans not as the helpless, primitive species they had once been considered, but as a force to be reckoned with. And with that recognition came fear. The Vraks were not the only species who took notice of the Terran victory. Across the galaxy, the power dynamics began to shift. The first to react were the Saurians, a brutal, reptilian race that had long dominated the outer rim of the galaxy. Known for their violent conquests and insatiable thirst for expansion, the Saurians had once looked at humanity as a weak, insignificant race, a species too small to matter. But now, after the Vraks had been crushed, the Saurians found themselves questioning their assumptions. If humanity could defeat the Vraks, a race feared across the stars, what might they be capable of? The Saurians, accustomed to instilling fear in their enemies, began to feel the sting of their own vulnerability. There was no doubt in their minds. Humanity was now a threat, and they had to act fast to ensure that their dominance was not threatened. Saurian war councils convened in secret, with the galaxy's most powerful warlords gathering to discuss their next steps. The Saurians knew they couldn't afford to make the same mistake the Vraks had made. They had underestimated humanity once, and that had cost the Vraks everything. The Saurians, however, were not known for making the same mistake twice. They would prepare for war, but they would do so carefully, ensuring that humanity was crushed before it had the chance to rise any higher. At the same time, the Veltrax, an enigmatic race of psychic beings who had long ruled over vast stretches of space using their mental abilities, also took notice. The Veltraxals had long relied on their psychic powers to maintain control over other species, manipulating minds and bending entire civilizations to their will. But there was something about the Terrans that made them nervous. Unlike the countless other races the Veltrax had subjugated, humanity seemed immune to their mental influence. And while the Veltrax had never truly feared any species before, the Terrans' unexpected victory over the Vraks made them reconsider everything they had believed about the universe. If humanity could win a battle like that without relying on psychic abilities, what might they do in the future? The Veltrax were silent for a time, but their unease was undeniable. They knew they had to make a choice. They could either leave humanity to grow, or they could try to subdue them before they became too dangerous. It was a choice that weighed heavily on their leaders. Meanwhile, closer to home, the Terran Federation itself was undergoing massive changes. The victory at Galcoran Nebula had not only shaken the galaxy's power structure, but it had also ignited a new sense of purpose and pride among the human population. For decades, humanity had been struggling to find its place in the galactic order, often dismissed and ignored by the more advanced species. Now, however, the Terrans had proven they were capable of holding their own. The Federation's leaders understood that this victory was not just a military triumph, it was a declaration to the galaxy that humanity was no longer a species to be underestimated. Admiral Catherine Rhodes, the woman who had led the Terran fleet to victory, became an icon, a symbol of human strength and resilience. She was hailed as a hero, but her success also made her it. The Terran Federation, for its part, was also preparing for what was to come. The Federation's military leaders, bolstered by the success of the Galcoran Nebula battle, began to push for the expansion of the Terran fleet. But not everyone agreed. Some within the Federation argued that humanity had no place in a galaxy dominated by ancient and powerful species. There were still many within human ranks who believed in diplomacy and peaceful coexistence. But those voices were growing quieter with every passing day. Humanity had tasted victory, and now the call for more power was hard to ignore. The human diplomats, once the Federation's strongest advocates for peace, found themselves increasingly sidelined. As the Saurians and Veltrax began to mobilize, there were whispers of a coming war one that could engulf the galaxy in a conflict unlike any before. The Federation's leaders knew that their best chance for survival lay in taking a stand and securing humanity's place in the galaxy. But how? They were still a young species, untested against the full might of the galaxy's older, more established powers. The Vraks had been a significant threat, but they were not the only power that needed to be dealt with. Meanwhile, the rest of the galaxy watched from the sidelines, unsure of what to make of the Terrans' sudden rise. Species that had long considered humanity to be insignificant now found themselves calculating the odds. The Pratari, a peaceful species of scholars, had long maintained neutrality in galactic matters, but they now began to debate whether they should offer an alliance to the Terrans. The Thrix, a nomadic and highly resourceful race, began to consider the possibility of forging trade agreements with humanity. The war with the Vrax had shifted the balance of power, and many species could see the opportunity to use humanity's newfound strength to their advantage. The galaxy, it seemed, had no choice but to adapt to the new reality. Humanity was no longer the underdog. The question now was whether the rest of the galaxy would accept the Terrans as equals, or whether they would unite to crush the human threat before it could grow. But no matter the outcome, the Terrans had already made their mark. And as their influence spread, the galaxy began to realize something they had never expected. Humanity was not just a force to be reckoned with. They were a force that would change everything. In the weeks following the battle, the stars themselves seemed to burn brighter. The galaxy's powers shifted and reshaped themselves, and as new alliances formed and old ones faltered, one truth became clear: the Terrans were here to stay. The galaxy would have to reckon with them, one way or another. The galaxy had never seen a war like this. For centuries, the mighty and the powerful had dominated, shaping the course of history with ease. But humanity, once dismissed as weak and insignificant, had become a force to be reckoned with. The Battle of the Galcoran Nebula had proven that. The Vrax were defeated, humiliated by a smaller, seemingly helpless species. The victory had ignited both fear and respect in the hearts of the galaxy's most powerful empires. But while the Terrans celebrated their hard-earned triumph, they soon realized that the real battle was only just beginning. Two fronts were forming, and the Terran Federation was caught in the middle. The Saurians, who had watched the Terran victory with increasing alarm, were the first to make their move. A race known for their ruthless tactics and their unyielding drive for power, the Saurians had long kept their eyes on the expansion of their empire. The Terrans had stirred something in them, a sense of fear and a thirst for dominance. They could not allow this human victory to go unchallenged. The Saurian war councils convened in secret, plotting their next steps. It wasn't enough to launch an attack on humanity. They needed to break the Terrans before they could rise further. With their massive fleets and relentless warriors, the Saurians were certain they could crush the Terran threat once and for all. But there was another threat to contend with. The Veltrax, an ancient species of psychic beings, had always watched the galaxy from the shadows. The Veltraxes had ruled many star systems in the past, using their powerful psychic abilities to manipulate entire civilizations. Their mental control over weaker species had allowed them to remain in the background, avoiding direct conflict. However, the defeat of the Vrax, combined with the Terrans' rapid rise, had unsettled them in ways they hadn't anticipated. The Veltrax were not used to feeling vulnerable, but the Terrans were immune to their psychic influence. This, more than anything, frightened them. The Veltrax had maintained their supremacy for eons, and they were not about to let a species like humanity disrupt the natural order of the galaxy. They could not afford to let the Terrans grow stronger, so they decided to act swiftly and decisively. The Terran Federation, caught unaware by the swift movements of these two powerful enemies, now faced a war on two fronts. The pressure on the Federation's leadership was overwhelming. Admiral Catherine Rhodes, the hero of the Galcoran Nebula, was thrust into the center of the storm. The Terran fleet, though still new and not as large as the Saurian or Veltrax fleets, had proven its strength. But strength alone wouldn't be enough this time. The galaxy was watching, and the Federation knew that if they failed, humanity would be crushed under the combined weight of two of the most feared species in the universe. The first assault came from the Saurians. Their fleet, massive and brutal, struck swiftly, launching a full-scale invasion of the outer territories of human space. The Saurians, with their advanced weaponry and unrelenting tactics, overwhelmed the human defenses. Entire colonies fell within days, their populations slaughtered or captured. It was a massacre, and the Terran forces, though skilled, found themselves on the back foot. The Saurians were relentless, pushing deeper into Terran territory, their war machines relentless in their quest to break the humans. Admiral Rhodes knew that the Terrans were fighting not only to protect their people, but to prove that they could withstand the full force of the galaxy's might. While the Saurians rained fire on one front, the Veltrax made their move. Using their psychic abilities, they began to infiltrate human command and communication networks. Subtle at first, their influence was dangerous. Ships mysteriously malfunctioned, crews reported strange hallucinations, and communication lines were flooded with disorienting messages. It was a psychological war that the humans had never expected. The Veltrax didn't need to rely on brute force. They twisted the minds of the Terrans, undermining their ability to respond effectively. The mental pressure was unbearable for some. It wasn't just physical war, it was a battle for the mind. The Veltrax knew that if they could break the Terran resolve, the physical war would be as good as won. Asa. The situation grew dire. The Terrans found themselves caught between the two enemies, fighting for survival on two fronts. Admiral Rhodes, ever the strategist, understood that the only way to overcome this was to fight back on both fronts with precision and calculated moves. The key was not to panic, but to use every advantage at their disposal. The Terrans may have been outnumbered, but they were not outmatched. In the midst of the Saurian onslaught, Rhodes ordered the Terran fleet to fall back to a strategically advantageous location, the Arcturus system, a region of space with numerous asteroid fields and hidden stations. The Saurians had expected the Terrans to put up a defensive line, but Rhodes understood that the best way to slow their advance was not through head-on confrontation, it was through clever tactics. Using the dense asteroid fields to mask their movements and launching guerrilla strikes against the Saurian supply lines, the Terrans managed to slow the Saurian advance. Every Saurian ship they disabled or destroyed was a victory, no matter how small. The Terrans knew they couldn't win this war in one battle, but if they could delay the Saurian forces long enough, they might stand a chance. On the other front, the Veltrax proved to be a more elusive enemy. Their psychic abilities were powerful, and the Terrans had no way of defending against them. Admiral Rhodes understood that they needed to turn the tables on the Veltrax, not by fighting them directly, but by using their own tactics against them. She ordered her fleet to break up into small, uncoordinated units. This would make it harder for the Veltrax to manipulate their minds, as the psychic beings could no longer focus on a single target. It was a dangerous strategy, but it worked. The Veltrax Orcs, unable to focus their abilities on the scattered human forces, began to lose their hold over the Terran fleet. The human mind, unpredictable and difficult to control, proved to be their greatest weapon. As the war dragged on, both the Saurians and the Veltrax found themselves frustrated. The Terrans, though outnumbered and under immense pressure, fought back with unrelenting courage. Every battle, every skirmish, was a reminder that humanity would not go quietly into the night. And as the galaxy watched, one thing became clear. The Terrans had not only survived, they were evolving. The war on two fronts had become a proving ground, a test of humanity's resilience and resourcefulness. In the darkest moments, when hope seemed lost, Admiral Rhodes stood at the helm of the Terran flagship. She knew that humanity was now fighting for more than just survival. They were. The galaxy had never witnessed anything like it. The Terran Federation, once a fledgling power among the stars, was now cornered, its very existence hanging by a thread. After months of relentless fighting on two fronts, the Terrans were finally facing the unthinkable. The Saurians, a brutal, war-hungry race, had pushed the Terran forces to the brink. And the Veltrax, with their mind-bending psychic powers, had managed to infiltrate and destabilize human command. It seemed as though humanity's time had come. But even in the face of defeat, there was one thing the Terrans refused to do: surrender. This was their last stand, and they would fight to the bitter end. Admiral Catherine Rhodes stood at the command bridge of the flagship Resolute, staring out at the vast expanse of space. The stars were cold, distant reminders of a future that might never come. Her fleet was battered, its numbers reduced to a fraction of their original strength. The Saurian warships loomed on the horizon, massive and unyielding. Their engines thrummed with power, and their weapons were primed for destruction. The Veltrax, too, had intensified their psychic attacks, attempting to break the Terran will from within. Rhodes knew this was it. If they didn't make their stand here, in the heart of human space, There would be no Federation left to fight for. "We can't win this, Admiral," a voice behind her spoke, breaking the heavy silence. Captain John Harper, a veteran of the Galcoran Nebula battle, stood nearby, his face drawn with exhaustion. "Our fleet is too small, too wounded. If we don't retreat now, we're going to lose everything." Rhodes turned slowly to face him, her expression unreadable. "Retreat? After everything we fought for? I'm not running. We stand here, or we die here. If the galaxy is going to remember humanity, it will remember us as the ones who refuse to bow down to anyone, not the Saurians, not the Veltrax, not anyone." Her voice was steady, unwavering. Harper looked at her, a mix of admiration and fear in his eyes. He had always known Rhodes as a leader of unwavering conviction, but even he couldn't ignore the grim reality. The Terrans had already lost so much. Colonies were gone. Entire fleets had been wiped out. Yet there was something in Rhodes's eyes that made him pause. Something that reminded him of why they had fought in the first place. Humanity had always been a species that had faced impossible odds, and still, they had pushed forward. "We'll fight to the end, then," Harper said, finally, nodding. Together. It wasn't the most defensible position, but it was the only one left. Rhodes had chosen it for its proximity to a nearby asteroid belt, a place where the Saurian ship's massive size would hinder their movements. The plan was simple: buy time. The Saurians and the Veltrax had to believe that humanity was stronger than it appeared. If they could hold out long enough, perhaps an opportunity would arise some way to turn the tide. But that was a big if. The battle began with a deafening roar. Saurian ships launched from their battle formation, their weapons lighting up the dark void of space. Massive plasma cannons fired, their beams cutting through the darkness toward the Terran defenses. The Resolute shook under the impact, but the shields held, a testament to the engineering prowess that humanity had developed. The Terran ships, smaller but nimbler, returned fire, launching salvo after salvo at the incoming enemy. The asteroid field, though chaotic, provided them with some cover, and the human ships used it to their advantage. They darted through the rocks, avoiding the larger Saurian vessels that couldn't maneuver as easily. For a while, the Terrans managed to keep the Saurians at bay. It wasn't enough to win, but it was enough to make the enemy hesitate. But the Veltrax, lurking in the background, were not so easily deterred. They attacked with psychic fury, their power rippling through the minds of the Terran fleet. Crews scrambled, clutching their heads as waves of mental energy crashed over them. In the midst of it, some began to falter. Some ships lost contact with their commanders, leaving them vulnerable. The Veltrax's influence was subtle but deadly. Rhodes, aware of the danger, was quick to act. "Cut all communication between ships," she ordered. "Use encrypted channels only. We can't let them break our unity." She knew that the Veltrax's power lay in the ability to control, to turn soldiers against one another. If they could sever the link between the Terran vessels, they might be able to counteract the psychic onslaught. But even as the fleet adjusted its tactics, the psychological pressure was mounting. Rhodes felt it too, her mind tugged at by the invisible force of the Veltrax. She fought it back with all her strength, but she knew she couldn't hold out forever. Hours passed, and the battle raged on. The Terran fleet was battered, its numbers dwindling with each passing moment. The Saurians were relentless, their forces undeterred by the human resistance. It was only a matter of time before the Terran ships would be overwhelmed, but there was still one last hope. A signal, faint and barely noticeable, came through the communications channel. It was a message from the distant remnants of the Terran fleet, a message that the Federation had been able to send reinforcements, just as the battle seemed lost. Rhodes smiled grimly as the faintest flicker of hope ignited in her chest. The cavalry was coming, but it might be too late. The Veltrax had already broken through the mental defenses of the fleet's command. It wouldn't be long before the Saurians realized the Terrans were faltering. Yet, even as the final hour approached, the Admiral refused to yield. "We fight to the end," she said softly to herself, "or we don't fight at all." Then, it happened. A massive explosion rocked the battlefront. One of the Saurian ships, the flagship Tyrant, had been struck by a lucky shot from the Resolute. The blast sent shockwaves across the battlefield, and for a moment, everything seemed to freeze. The Saurian fleet hesitated. Rhodes saw the opening. Now, she shouted, ordering the Terran fleet to launch a final, desperate counteroffensive. The Terran ships surged forward, fighting with everything they had left. For a few precious moments, the momentum shifted. The Saurians, stunned by the unexpected attack, faltered, and the Veltrax struggled to maintain their psychic grip. The Terran forces pushed forward, driving the Saurians back bit by bit. But the battle was not won yet. The Terran fleet, though renewed by the unexpected turn of events, was still outnumbered. The fight was far from over. And as Rhodes looked out at the stars, she knew that even if they won this fight, the war was far from over. Humanity had made its stand. The galaxy would know that the Terrans were not to be underestimated, but the cost of this victory, whatever it would be immeasurable. Still, Rhodes stood tall, unbowed. Whatever the future held, humanity would fight. And they would fight until the very last breath,